Hello everyone. China's economic reforms and their implications for foreign investors are hot topics ahead of the upcoming third plenary session of the 20th Communist Party of China Central Committee, or 三中全会. We spoke with Michael Hart, president of AmCham China, on the sidelines of the conference marking the 70th anniversary of the 5 Principles of Peaceful Coexistence. Here are some key insights from our conversation.
How do you think these principles can influence or have already influenced the China-US relations, especially the business relations?
If you think about the past multiple decades, the reason that US and China have been able to trade, the reason that Europe and the US and Asia have been able to trade is because we do have peace in general most of the world, because we have shipping lanes and aviation lanes that everybody can use and they're dependable. That's the basis for global trading systems. And so it has been working. We have all been benefiting from a global order where you can use the best from every region. That's important.
You have been in China for almost 2 decades?
Almost 3 decades.
Almost 3 decades. So how do you see the evolving economic landscape in China?
Yeah, so one of the things that China has done well is it set up a platform for companies to invest. For example, this concept of special economic zones or development zones. This is where most of the foreign investment has been in manufacturing and in sourcing. And so a set of consistent rules, an area where people can invest and they know what's going to happen with that investment. That's been part of the fundamental strength of foreign investment into China is people say, I'm going to invest in this area and I know the treatment I'm going to get. That's the stability that's really important for foreign trade. One of the things that happened during COVID was all of a sudden, not just in China, but globally, supply chains stopped working, factories closed, etc., and that caused a major hiccup for a couple of years. And so we're hopeful to get back to business as normal. And in most cases, we are back to business as normal again, and you see the global supply chains and manufacturing working again, and we're all profiting.
How do you assess the current state of Chinese economy? Do you think it's collapsing, as some reports have claimed?
I think the biggest challenge for the Chinese economy is that it grew so fast for so long that people didn't realize what a mature economy growth looks like. And so if China continues to grow at 4 or 5%, 5 or 6% a year, there's a lot of opportunities there. But I think that everybody has to adjust their expectations that we are not going to grow in China at 8% a year. And so I think China's biggest challenge is the normalization of growth rates. And so I think Chinese consumers need to realize that their money's not going to double in a year or two. Their housing price isn't going to double in 2 or 3 years. But there are profits to be made in China. Many AmCham China companies continue to be successful here. And as I said earlier, I spoke to one company yesterday that has very strong growth plans in China based on the economy. And so we're trying to help companies find those opportunities.
As you just noted, there have been some tensions between China and US, and also it affects the business relationship between the two countries.
There's a couple levels. One is political to political. So when the US government, Chinese government have some differences, they air those differences. When US companies and Chinese companies work together, we have to be much more practical, right? So we're not looking for areas of difference, we're looking for areas of cooperation. The United States doesn't agree with Europe as well on everything, but we find ways to trade. And so I think the relationship with China has developed in the same way.
Can you give us a general picture of American business right now operating in China?
China has continued to be, for the past few decades, a very important part of business for many US companies. Right, so many US companies depend upon China to manufacture. Many depend upon China to source materials. And then of course many sell to China. So when we do our annual surveys at AmCham China and we ask people how they're doing, it really depends by sector. So for example, those who are focused on the China consumer sector generally are pretty optimistic. There are some who are in technology who are a little more nervous because this is an area where US and China have some tensions, where each has put restrictions on the other. And so when we talk to our member companies, the vast majority of them say they plan to continue to be here, they're finding ways to operate, and as long as they can, they'll continue to be here. even for people who say they want to see the US and China stop trading, I don't see it particularly practical, and it's not something that could even happen in the next sort of decade or so.
So is China still the top one for American investment?
It really depends sector by sector. Some companies certainly continue to see places to invest here and produce. One of the concerns in China is that China has become more expensive. And so that's a positive story in the sense of salaries have risen in China. But China is not the cheapest place to produce anymore, and that's okay. China has a strong position in certain areas with technology and in research. But China is not the cheapest place for everybody, and even Chinese companies are in some cases outsourcing to other places to find cheaper labor. So it really depends on your sector.
And the Biden administration raised the tariffs on some Chinese goods. Compared to American business presence in China, there are far fewer Chinese companies right now in the US. How do you explain the discrepancy?
Well, I think the US has an open market, so anybody that wants to invest in the US can. China has a relatively open investment market, and so US companies have come here to invest for decades, right? Partially because they saw a large market, partially because there was cheaper labor, etc. So it's hard to make a direct sort of comparison place for place.
America used to be the biggest promoter of globalization and free trade. And right now we see there seems to be a growing protectionism happening in the US.
So I think in general, the American Chamber of Commerce in China is not for tariffs and trade restrictions. The truth is restrictions are in place in both directions. China has some restrictions on investment. The US has some restrictions on investment. And so part of the reason that Donald Trump put on tariffs, part of the reasons that the Biden administration renewed those tariffs was they felt that the playing field wasn't fair. So again, those are political decisions to put on tariffs, and so we have to leave it to the politicians to decide when is the right time to put those on.
How do you think the upcoming elections will affect the business relationship between the two countries?
Well, one of the things with elections in the U.S. is they're always interesting and entertaining. I can assure you that U.S. companies will continue to see China as an important market for them. It's an important part of the revenue and profits for many U.S. companies, and so regardless of who the next U.S. president will be, there will be U.S. companies here.